It's a tricky thing when the first entry in a potential series falls short of expectations. If a new IP is shredded by the critics, the chances of it getting a sequel are slim. For example, when Just Cause, Shadowrun, and Killzone underperformed, not many were pining for more. As such, it's astonishing how these unwanted continuations pulled out all the stops, offering players the jaw-dropping experience they should have got the first time around, but hey, better late than never. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are the 10 best sequels from terrible video games. Number 10, Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. In 2015, Platonic announced a Kickstarter campaign for Yooka-Laylee, a love letter to Rare's beloved platformer Banjo-Kazooie. Amazingly, the team hit their target of £175,000 in 40 minutes. By the end, they raised $2 million, proving Banjo lovers had a firm belief in the project. Despite all the buzz, Yooka-Laylee failed to deliver. Even though this spiritual successor nails Banjo-Kazooie's aesthetic and humor, this outdated clone didn't match the creativity and fluidity of the Bear and Bird's adventure saga. Though expectations were significantly lower for the sequel, Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair turned out far better. With its smooth gameplay, beautiful level designs, clever puzzles, and catchy tunes, this cutesy collectathon did Rare proud. What makes this follow-up stand out is its unconventional setup and structure. Unlike most platformers, our titular heroes can enter the final stage immediately. However, they don't stand a chance due to the level's extensive length and brutal difficulty. But for this reason, Yooka and Laylee must navigate through various levels and collect dozens of bees, each of which will increase our heroes' defenses. Similar to Shovel Knight, the Impossible Lair scratches that nostalgic itch without relying on it, since it has plenty of unique mechanics to satiate die-hard platforming fans. Number 9, Destiny 2. Destiny's relentless promotions and ludicrous budget indicated that Bungie's cosmic loot shooter would be the next big thing. Though Destiny, of course, wasn't a complete disaster, it didn't come close to meeting expectations. Critics used words like cobbled and plundered in their reviews, since it was clear as day that Destiny unabashedly stole elements from superior shooters rather than relying on its own innovations. Due to the excessive grinding, disjointed plot, and Peter Dinklage's monotonous performance, it's hard to believe Destiny was ever intended to be a showstopper. Even though Destiny 2 was considered more of the same and pejoratively labeled Destiny 1.5, it was a big step in the right direction, at least 0.5. Thanks to the expansive story, well-crafted maps, tight gunplay, and focus on exploration, the gameplay felt far less laborious. The endless ways to synergize armor mods and perks with weapons encourages players to lose countless hours in the PvP mode. The free annual updates also constantly improved on the gameplay and offered a staggering amount of content. Also, not asking Dinklage to reprise his role was probably a good idea. It had a rocky start, but Destiny's future is looking brighter than ever. Number 8, new Pokémon Snap. Back in 1999, Nintendo collaborated with HAL Laboratory for a photography-based game called Pokémon Snap. The on-rails title has the protagonist navigate through a set path while taking pictures of approaching creatures. New rewards and paths are unlocked by taking striking photos, encouraging players to stay alert. Despite the solid pitch, Pokémon Snap was very bare bones, with only 7 levels and 63 Pokémon defined, so the spin-off could be completed in under 2 hours. Also, the photography mechanic wasn't consistent, so players sometimes received minimal points for incredible photos, and vice versa. Fortunately, the sequel knocked it out of the park. Even though recent Pokémon games have been criticized for their poor graphics, new Pokémon Snap looks fittingly picturesque. Thanks to the smooth photography mechanics and balanced reward system, the gameplay is better than ever. Although the gameplay in the original quickly became tiresome, that's not the case here. Since certain critters only come out during certain periods or by diverting from the main path, players are encouraged to replay levels and try different things. As a result, revisiting areas rarely feels like a chore. And with over 200 Pokemon to discover, new Pokemon Snap keeps fans enthralled for a much longer time. Number 7, Saints Row the Third. Due to Grand Theft Auto 3's overwhelming influence on the gaming industry, open-world copycats were inevitable, and one of the main doppelgangers that GTA spawned was Volition's crime sandbox, Saints Row. Unfortunately, this street shooter did little to distinguish itself as anything but a poor imitation of Rockstar's powerhouse IP. When Saints Row 2 received the same criticism, Volition realized their brand wouldn't last unless they did something drastic. Thankfully, the threequel gave Saints Row a second win. Rather than grounding the game in reality, Saints Row the Third focused more on meta-gags, cartoony characters, and blasting enemies with octopus guns. Even though this type of juvenile humor could become grating and it's not everybody's cup of tea, it's actually rarely the case since missions are so inventive and fun. One minute you're taking part in a Japanese game show, the next you're dropped into a zombie apocalypse or battling luchador wrestlers. However, none of this would matter if the gameplay wasn't up to scratch. Fortunately, the third entry is a dream to play. The controls are on point, the customization options are accessible and diverse, and the characters are surprisingly well developed. Not only is Saints Row the Third one of the most enjoyable open world titles out there, it even excels over GTA in certain departments. Number 6. Shadowrun Dragonfall. The Shadowrun tabletop game was hugely popular upon its release, encouraging the creators to franchise the hell out of it. Within a few years, the cyberpunk fantasy saga inspired books, collectible cards, and of course, video games. Although the first video game adaptation was okay, it didn't set the world on fire. Sadly, the second entry wasn't much better, or the third, or the fourth. In fact, it wasn't until the release of the sixth entry, Dragonfall, before the tabletop RPG was done true justice. Weirdly, Dragonfall started off as DLC for the fifth installment, Shadowrun Legends. When the add-on received better reviews than the game itself, the isometric role player was released as a separate title. Dragonfall captures the literal magic of the source material, while still remaining accessible to those unfamiliar with it. Each party member is so thoroughly fleshed out, players will be pushed to want to learn more about them. Though the turn-based combat was solid in the last entry, this time around there's new techniques tossed in, refining it to perfection. The series may not have improved since Dragonfall, but at least Shadowrun purists finally got the gaming experience they always wanted. Number 5. Just Cause 2. With nearly 400 square miles to explore, 20 plus missions, and 300 side quests, Just Cause seemed like a mega hit in the making. Even though Avalanche Studios' shooter took 3 years to make, the project had rushed development written all over it. It had a barrage of game-killing glitches, making certain missions impossible, and worst of all, some ports never received a patch to remedy the glaring issues. Luckily, Avalanche set things right with the sequel, boasting over-the-top action from beginning to end. Every mission feels like a middle finger to the laws of physics, especially while surfing missiles or turning windmills into rudimentary catapults. Also, the mechanics of the grappling hook are so flawlessly designed it puts Batman's gizmo to shame. With this gadget, our hero can crash enemy automobiles into each other, swing onto a vehicle from the air, or attach a car to a helicopter, using the automobile like a wrecking ball. Due to the glut of creative side quests, players should be coming back to Just Cause 2 again and again, long after they're done with the main campaign. It might not be perfect, especially the voice acting, but this sequel is light years ahead of its predecessor. Number 4. Nier Automata. As the title suggests, Platinum Games' robot-bashing title is a follow-up to Nier, which was released in 2010. However, the series' origins go back earlier than that. In 2003, Cavia released a hack-and-slash title called Drakengard. Though the first 2 installments were panned, they made enough cash to warrant the Nier spin-off, set a millennium in the future. This installment was also heavily criticized due to its mediocre graphics, bland environments, and janky animations. After receiving 3 strikes, the franchise could have been abandoned then and there. Instead, Platinum Games released a follow-up 7 years later, blowing its competition out of the water. Even though Nier Automata follows a similar structure to its predecessor, every aspect is more cohesive and balanced. The gameplay blends genres beautifully, including hack and slash, RPG, shoot 'em up, and even text adventure. The immense size of the enemies makes the simplest battles feel epic. More impressively, the frame rate rarely lags, no matter how many screen-filling foes our heroes face. Nier Automata also requires multiple playthroughs to unlock new areas and story elements. Although playing the main campaign repeatedly can be tedious for certain games, players are encouraged to replay Automata to comprehend the inner complexities of the heroes and get the full story. Number 3. Killzone 2. When a shooter is sold as a Halo killer, the developers are expected to deliver a genre-defining FPS. Sadly, Killzone was anything but, due to its technical issues, fumbling controls, frame rate drops, and woeful AI. Though the PSP's Killzone Liberation made improvements, it was still nowhere near as big as was promised. As a result, the gaming community weren't optimistic when Killzone 2 was being advertised like crazy, believing the developers would probably deliver more of the same. But after playing Killzone 2 for a matter of minutes, it's clear the creators spared no expense. The single-player campaign is beautifully structured and well-paced. The graphics look magnificent even by today's standards. The focus on gritty realism makes players feel like they're controlling living and breathing soldiers rather than a bunch of NPCs. And not only that, Joris de Man's exquisite soundtrack was awarded the Ivor Novello, making Killzone 2 the first video game to receive the prize, whose pronunciation I probably just butchered, so I apologize. Instead of getting a generic sequel, Guerrilla Games gave the world one of the best games of the year, and arguably the greatest shooter on the PS3. Even though Halo 2 was released the same year, Killzone 2 got far more attention and praise. Number 2. Street Fighter 2. Street Fighter 2 didn't just revolutionize the fighting genre, but the arcade industry and competitive gaming. Capcom's prize sequel was so influential, it's easy to forget about the one that started it all. The reason why 1987 Street Fighter slips our collective minds is simple. It's not very good. Although Street Fighter's core concept is the same as the iconic sequel, it was let down by its clunky combat and unresponsive controls. The simplest moves require an unrealistic level of precision, making the gameplay pretty frustrating. With only 2 characters to choose from, limited moves, and a forgettable soundtrack, the first Street Fighter had none of the hallmarks the series is known for. Fortunately, Capcom believed the property had untapped potential, inspiring them to give it another shot. And the rest is history. Street Fighter 2 has inspired countless copycats, umpteen ports, crossovers, comics, animated shows, an awesome animated movie, a crappy live-action movie, spin-offs, and remakes. 30 years later, the beloved saga has continued to thrive. Even though the sequels also received heavy praise, except Street Fighter V, there's no question Street Fighter 2 is the franchise's defining entry. Number 1. Red Dead Redemption. On the surface, Red Dead Revolver felt like it was bending over backwards to give players a true Wild West experience. Since players could take control of half a dozen characters, ride horses, duel on trains, and challenge gunslingers to a quick draw shootout, the spaghetti western title could have been a classic. Too bad Revolver failed in the most basic of departments, including visuals, controls, and gaming mechanics. After receiving mediocre reviews, nobody would have blamed Rockstar if they decided to put Red Dead out of its misery. Instead, the developers created a sequel that is, without an ounce of exaggeration, one of the greatest video games ever made. Due to its nuanced characters, glorious narrative, impeccable world building, and teeming visuals, it's impossible to criticize Red Dead Redemption negatively without nitpicking. The fact that the developers programmed the horse's testicles to shrink in cold water just goes to show how the attention to detail is second to none. Even though Redemption seemed perfect, its follow-up is considered by many to be even better. Red Dead Redemption 2 wasn't just a beautiful game, it's a true work of art. Looking back on the 3 games as a whole, Rockstar's tenacity and determination needs to be commended. After Revolver failed, the development team could have abandoned the franchise and moved on to greener pastures. Instead, they learned from their mistakes and tried again, creating 2 masterpieces in the process.